Stephen Krashen, in 1982, published a book, Principles and Practice in Second Language Acquisition. And on page 27, we find this statement: speaking ability emerges on its own after enough competence has been developed by listening and understanding. So this is part of an explanation of why it is that when small children are exposed to a language, a new language, they very often have a long silent period, then they start to speak, and then they make very rapid progress. And the point here is that what's happened is they've acquired competence through listening and understanding during that silent period, and then the speaking ability appears to just flourish out of nothing, when in fact that silent period is part of the secret. In 1984, J. Marvin Brown set out to, quote, find out what will happen if we hold strictly to this part of Krashen's theory. And what he came up with was initially called listening approach and is now called ALG, automatic language growth. It calls for a silent period of hundreds of hours. No memorizing, no practicing, no speaking, just comprehensible input. And Brown reported that those who stuck to these rules achieved a command of Thai that was better and more native-like than his own, and that they achieved this in less time overall than with other language learning methods. I think that sounds very exciting. But how to try it out? How are you going to hold your nerve through those hundreds of hours of the silent period? Well, that's partly what I'm trying to do here. I put together 10 hours of comprehensible input in a tiny constructed language called Toki Pona, which only has 120 words. So for sure, 10 hours isn't enough for a silent period even in Toki Pona under ALG, but it's at least enough for you to have an appreciation for what your subconscious is capable of when you get CI. So that's the idea. And the challenge is to watch all 10 hours and see what happens. So I am joined by Katrin. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we get started with the experiment, I like to ask people what their background is with language and language learning. So what would you say your background is?
It's a little bit complicated. I grew up bilingual. I have two native languages, but the truth is a little bit more complicated than that. I was born in Norway and moved to the US when I was 2.5 years old, and then moved back to Norway at 11. And so I had heard Norwegian in those childhood years up to 11 years old, but it was only my mother speaking Norwegian. We never spoke Norwegian back, and it was very simple, home Norwegian, go to bed, brush your teeth, that sort of thing. So when I got back to Norway, I was completely lost in Norwegian. I had the benefit of having the phonology in place, I think, and probably had a strong basis in terms of like the structure of the language, but it really felt like I was starting nearly from scratch when I got here.
That's quite a difficult experience, I think. I've met a number of people who have what you might say a home language like that. And of course, the accent is perfect, and everybody expects them to be very good in the language, but they haven't had that broad base of exposure. And it's unfair, really, but the world doesn't understand. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So they dropped me in school, and it turned out it was fine. But the first couple of years were actually kind of a struggle in some ways.
I see.
And yeah, so it took me about 4 years, I would say, to catch up to my peers in Norwegian, to where I was getting really good grades in school, and you couldn't guess that I hadn't spent my whole life in Norway. But yeah, 4 years is a lot. Even like I came back at 11, and most people say that there's that, what is the critical period theory? Yeah, I'm not sure how much I believe in it, but 11 is definitely within that critical period, and even then it took several years to really find my footing.
Yeah, I don't think that is really surprising under any theory. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, a language is kind of a big thing, right?
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
it's
It
no
is.
small thing.
I like to think of language as like a palace with many rooms, and like the central area of the palace is your home, and then you have different wings of the palace, and this is work or school or education. And if you ask a question, which language do you speak in each room of this palace? It's only really English speakers that can speak the same language in all the rooms
Right.
in this world. You know, if
Yeah,
let's say you're German, in the rooms down that corridor over there related to computer programming and the internet, there's some English, right?
there's definitely English. Yeah, in Norway, I work as a computer programmer here in Norway, and we speak English at work. Our comments in the code are, I mean, I want to say 99% English.
Yeah.
When we describe code, when we ask others to look at code, it's always in English, even though most of the people working on it are Norwegian.
Yeah, it's I have that experience sometimes in Turkish. It just sometimes it's too much work to switch between from one to the other, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So with language learning, so you say you
Yeah.
have two native languages. What other languages have you tried to learn on top of those?
Yeah. So after high school, I moved to France. I had no basis in French. I hadn't studied it in school. I just kind of plopped into a place in Paris, and I wasn't trying to learn French at all, but I was surrounded by people, by French speakers. I mean, some of them were Italian speakers who also spoke French, but it was largely a kind of the perfect immersion environment.
Hmm.
So I mean, there were a few things that made it perfect. I was taking group classes, so I was at a mime school, so a physical theater school.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
and so there were group classes, and everything that the teacher was saying, I could watch what the other students were doing in response, and I didn't really have to speak mime, and so I
That's
spent a lot of
TPR.
time listening. Yeah, basically. And so I was doing, classic ballet, modern ballet, various types of physical theater, acrobatics, fencing, like the whole gamut. And then also hanging out with the other students in between classes and outside of school. I would just listen to whatever they were, chatting on about. And so within a short amount of time, I could follow quite well what was going on around me and guess and sort of interject little comments here and there eventually, like a word here, a phrase there. But I wasn't trying to learn French, and I didn't really start speaking until it felt natural. And I stayed there for 7 years, so it was like a life language for me. I lived my life in French for 7 years.
Um, but still, we're still on naturalistic methods, aren't we? It's like
Yeah,
somebody with a programmer's background like yourself, I would imagine just jumping in with grammar books and things. It just feels like something that it would be more natural
yeah.
for somebody with that background to do. But I don't know. First with your experience with Norwegian, then with French, it's like you have a lot of personal experience of picking up language. I would say,
Right.
would that be right?
Yeah. That's correct. And even as a teenager, I was hanging out with refugees a lot, and or kids from refugee families. So I was picking up a little bit of Farsi, a little bit of like Serbo-Croatian, because again, I wasn't really trying to learn
Yes.
it, but I was hearing it, and so there were some words that just kind of clicked into place. So yeah, I think I I was old enough to have a conscious sort of a conscious experience, or like a being conscious of what the experience felt like. Like
Hmm.
when you're 2 years old, you probably don't remember what it felt like to acquire your native language. I certainly don't. My mom actually says that when we moved to the U.S., I stopped speaking like entirely for a year before I started speaking again. So, but I don't remember this. Like I have no recollection of not speaking or what it felt like. But at 11, I do remember that. At 19, I definitely remember what it felt like to not be comfortable speaking until the words were just suddenly there. And when they were there, it wasn't like the language was suddenly available in its entirety. I was speaking a word here, a phrase there, like really simple sentences. I didn't always know what the exact words meant. I just knew what I was saying meant. So because I was hanging out with people in France, I was hanging out with people who spoke a sort of very slang heavy French. I was using a lot of slang, and I was using it correctly, but I didn't know it was slang until like 2 or 3 years later, when I started sort of becoming more aware of the different registers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, that just makes all the sense in the world. because language is a set.
Yeah.
You have to see it as a whole, and then registers kind of they're the last stage, really. It's you've got all these words, and now you're
Yeah.
finding out how they all sit together in the same space, right?
Yeah.
Just makes
Yeah. There's some situations where it's just not appropriate to use certain expressions. Yeah, you learn this the hard way.
Yeah, okay. Tough time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're English, Norwegian, French. Any more?
Right. Yeah. In school, in high school, junior high and high school, I did study German the traditional way.
Okay.
But I didn't treat it like a language. It was just a topic at school. And so I studied however they told me to study. I memorized, I learned the little grammar rules, and then I wrote my little essays. But it didn't feel like language. It felt like math. It was like the same thing. It was kind of fine. And so I've never used German. I've never it's never been a language that I've felt like I can use to communicate.
Right.
And then I took a break from languages for a long time, about 20 years. And then I got kind of burnt out at work and realized that I wanted to do something that was not programming outside of programming, because in my spare time, I was also doing programming. This is a very common experience for programmers. And so I realized that, I want to do something that's not programming outside of work. And I decided that I wanted to learn Korean, kind of on a whim. I had been exposed to a little bit of Korean through a friend of mine who's also a programmer. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn Korean. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to do language learning on purpose. And so I started watching all the YouTube videos that tell you how to learn a language. And of course, they're all kind of telling you different things. And I started just trying things. I read Gabriel Weiner's book, Fluent Forever. So I did a lot of flashcards in the beginning, memorizing words, and then got to the point where I guess I know words. What do I do next? Weiner says that, you get a tutor and then you learn sentences and you put the sentences on your flashcards. And so I did that. I got a tutor on Italki, and I recorded the lessons so that I could capture the audio of the sentences, and I put them on flashcards, and I did the flashcards, and I still felt like nothing was actually happening. Like, it didn't feel the same as previously when I had been acquiring Norwegian and French. It just felt really different. And so it was quite frustrating. And then I came across a video by a TPRS teacher in Orange County, how to acquire a language, not learn it, how to acquire any language, not learn it, I think. And he spent a year acquiring Arabic using TPRS type methods. Super fun video. He interviewed Krashen. He interviewed a bunch of different TPRS teachers, and he did really well in a year of Arabic. And so I was like, that's how it's going to happen. Like, this is what I'm going to do. This is totally going to work. And so I went back to Italki and tried to find different tutors on Italki who could describe pictures to me in Korean. And so I found a couple of tutors that I really liked and worked with for, I would say, probably about a year. At first, I used to think it was like 6 months, but I went back and looked at my timeline on Italki, and it's like, no, it's about a year, an hour or two a week. And that was better. Like, the language started opening up a little bit. It started unlocking things for me. But the teachers always expected me to describe the pictures. And I was like, how am I going to describe the picture? I don't know Korean yet. Like, you're supposed to describe the picture. And so I was always feeling a little bit frustrated in these lessons, but it kind of worked. It started working. After a year of that, I stumbled across Matt versus Japan, and he was like, input doesn't have to be comprehensible. And he's kind of right, but I was like, that was mind-blowing. And so I just started watching Korean dramas, and that was right about when the pandemic started. And so I spent the whole pandemic basically watching Korean dramas in Korean with no subtitles. And it's a lot slower when input is so much less comprehensible than when you get actual comprehensible input, but it still works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk about this later maybe, but there's a sweet spot between incomprehensible input on the one hand and transparent input on the other. I mean, in the sense that DPRS tends to deal in transparent input, which is a subset of comprehensible input. And then you go from that to AJAT, you know, all Korean, well, ACAT, I guess, all Korean all the time. And there's a middle ground, which I think is really where ALG is sitting. Have you what's your experience with ALG?
Yeah, so I have two experiences with ALG. The first one is that after 2,500 hours worth of Korean, I was like, okay, this is cool. And I got pretty far, but not to where I was like speaking naturally, not to where I was understanding 100% of my dramas or whatever. And then I stumbled across ALG. I had heard about it. I had heard about the school in Bangkok and been wanting to go, but with the pandemic, the school had to close and the ALG teachers all went online, and this was my chance. Like I realized that this is an opportunity. So I dropped Korean for a while. I'm coming back to it, but I dropped Korean for a while and started doing Thai from scratch. I had no exposure to Thai. I didn't know anything about the culture, nothing about the language, and I mean, I'm sure I've heard Thai once or twice at a Thai restaurant, but I wouldn't have been aware of it. So I was starting really from scratch, and I was really excited to see what is this going to feel like when I can do the whole process, because the teachers are available online. So I did that. I'm still doing that. I'm 2,000 hours in to Thai. Yeah.
And how
and then my second experience,
please continue.
My second experience is Toki Pona, like the 10 hours of Toki Pona that you created.
So just quickly, how would you compare your experience of Thai, of doing the ALG with Thai, compared to what you did with Korean?
Oh my gosh. So Thai was way easier.
Easy.
It just...
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Thai was way easier than Korean. And not necessarily inherently easier. I think Thai probably is inherently simpler in terms of grammar than Korean is. Like Thai feels like it doesn't really have any grammar. I mean, I'm sure it does.
Well, I mean,
sure
Korean is highly agglutinative, isn't it? I mean,
exactly, like Turkish,
I speak Turkish, and you know, going like the contrast from Turkish to Toki Pona, for example, is just so stark. It's not true.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm imagining it feels somewhat similar to going from Korean to Thai, where Korean, it's like you have what was it, 319 different verb forms that, you know, mix and match to get exactly the right nuance, which is kind of amazing. But also, if you're trying to memorize things, it's really hard. Whereas with Thai, I'm not really aware of much in terms of grammar. It doesn't seem like there aren't very many knobs that you have to fiddle with, it seems like. But the main thing is that I wasn't really trying with Thai. I wasn't trying to remember words. If I don't remember a word, it's just because I haven't heard it in enough contexts. I haven't been able to triangulate it. It's not completely there yet. Same with grammar. I'm not trying. I was even trying to avoid knowing anything about Thai explicitly. Like I didn't want to know how many tones there were, and of course, at some point, that was spoiled for me. Like someone said how many tones there were, and now I know. But I think it's fine. Like I was being a little bit extreme in my like wanting to treat it like an experiment. How far can you get without knowing anything about the language? But the progress was just so much faster. Mm-hmm. So in 2,000 hours of Thai, I'm much farther than I was in Korean at that same point. Just the difference is enormous.
So my current, where I am right now, I would put that down to the nature of the input you were getting being intentionally comprehensible, in the sense of being able to follow the story, work out what's going on. Whereas with a K-drama, you don't know what's going on in the scene, right? So it's incomprehensible input. So as you said, the grammar for Thai is easier, but I think the progress, I would guess, is more attributable to the comprehensibility of the input you were getting. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that I like on Refold.la is a website that sort of helps people who haven't been into immersion type learning approaches with languages start their journey, and they're really focused on how do you do it when there is no comprehensible input. That's my take on Refold, is like, how do you hack your way to a comprehensibility when there is no comprehensible input? And they do a really good job of it. And one of the things that they have is a comprehensibility scale that is really nice. It's like you can get the gist of something, or you can understand the story, but not a lot of the nuance. And what I found with Korean is, when I was starting with the dramas, I was at the point where I could kind of figure out what the story was about, and that was maybe just about it. And with like the ideal point for comprehensible input is that you can follow along the whole time, even if you're not getting details.
Yeah.
And I find that like my comprehension grows so fast when I can follow along, even if I'm not getting the details. I still know the whole time what's going on, more or less, in the story. Like when it's just kind of, oh, two people are talking and maybe there's a disagreement about a contract, I think. Like, that's not very helpful for language acquisition. I mean, it works eventually, but it's really, really slow.
Yes. Yeah, nice. Thanks very much for that. I mean, it's fascinating to interview somebody like you, because you've really had you've really tried everything, I think. I mean, you've had the experience of natural acquisition as a child, just at the point where you're old enough to consciously recognize what's going on. And you've also had that experience of German, the traditional approach, and then with the various kind of input-heavy methods. I think it's really fascinating to talk to somebody like you, who has really experienced everything. It feels like you've tried it all.
I feel like I haven't given traditional methods an honest college try. What is that? There's an expression. Like, I feel like I haven't really given traditional methods a solid effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe the reason this kind of thing is helpful is that there are many people out there who have tried a lot of traditional methods and have gotten very frustrated and disappointed with them, and they think it's something wrong with them. And there is a whole school of thought out there, comprehension, input, that side of things, that says that kind of method isn't supposed to work anyway. It's not you, it's not your fault. You know, try this input approach, and maybe you'll see for yourself that actually you're good at languages after all. So, I mean, there are plenty of people out there who are giving those methods a fair shake, I have to tell you.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's yeah, I take your point. But hey, I think nobody has the whole elephant, right?
Right.
You know that story about the blind men and the elephant, and one's got the tusk and one's got the tail, and you know,
it's a tree, it's a wall,
yeah,
it's a rope.
That's the point of conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so onto the experiment. Just to verify your deviation from baseline, as I like to call it, just for the sake of science, before you started watching the videos, did you know any Toki Pona?
I didn't even know what Toki Pona was. I mean, aside from somebody said it's a conlang, or I think it said in your intro, it's a conlang. That's all I knew about Toki Pona.
All right. The baseline experiment is you watch one video a day for 30 days, and the first thing we do after that is have this interview. What was your trajectory?
So for the first 30 days, I did watch one video a day, basically. There was one day where I forgot, and then there were a couple of days where I'd watch a video in the morning, and then in the evening I was like, I'll have another video. So I think maybe I did it in 27 or 28 days.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I think there's been some gap in time since you finished and we've been able to have this interview, isn't there?
Yeah, this is where the deviation happened.
Okay, go on.
There was a bit of deviation. We had a two-week gap. And so after I finished, I took a few days off, and then I watched the first video again.
Right.
And I had to speed it up to 1.5. Otherwise, it was so slow that my mind just went all over the place and couldn't focus on the video. And this was fantastic because I realized that I understood everything the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember liking the story. Like the first video was one of my favorites, actually.
Really?
Even the first time around. But
Uh,
watching it the second time at 1.5 speed and realizing that no, I got basically every detail of that story the first time, even though I had no language. Like I remember how exhausting it was to watch the first video because the language was just sounds. I couldn't make head or tail of anything. So that was a really nice experience. And then every few days in the past 2 weeks, I would blitz through a few more videos in 1.5. So I've actually watched the whole playlist at 1.5 also.
all right. Okay. Right. So that's not 20 hours.
No, it's not. It's 16. Yeah.
Oh, well done. Yes. There you go. Programmer, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know the figure. So all right. But that's fine. So essentially you haven't studied any Toki Pona at all.
No, yeah, no, I've not
Or
looked
anything
up
like
any
that.
of the words or like looked at any of the grammar. I've avoided sort of all the resources. I listened to one podcast where it was an interview with Sonia Lang because it seemed like she wasn't actually going to tell you anything about the language itself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right then. So let's give it a go. What I usually do is ask people to prepare like a 2 or 3 line conversation starter beforehand. I can't remember if I asked you to do that.
Nope.
Have something?
I have something, but
All
it's
right.
not. I didn't prepare anything spoken. What I did is I brought a few pictures that I thought maybe we can just talk about
Yeah.
in Toki Pona.
All right. Yes. Fine. Let's
All
do
right,
that. Do you
cool.
want to share screen?
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna need to share screen.
All right. Let me just allow you to do that. Okay. There we go.
All right, share. Now let's see if I can figure out. Uh-oh, the meeting's gonna end in a sec.
It's okay. We can connect again.
Okay. Are you?
I
Let's
can
see.
see it. Yeah.
Can you see a big picture or just a
No,
small picture?
I can see a small picture inside the
Maybe I can
folder.
make it. Is that better? Can you see it
Yes, I
bigger
think
now?
that's fine. Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right, let's go. Sinaken Toki.
Soeli ni liseme.
Soeli ni seme. Soeli ni mila. Soeli ni li soeli walo.
Toki. Soeli mila. Soli nili soeli walo. Taso. Soeli nila li seme.
Lon. Soeli ni li soeli pimea. Taso nasin pi soeli ni li sama nasin pi soeli walo.
En soeli nili seme.
Li soeli pi kule mute.
Soeli pikule mute. Soeli ni en soeli ni en soeli ni nasin li sama.
Lon.
Nasin li sama.
Nasin li sama.
Linea pi soeli ni li seli. Jan kepeken linea pi soeli ni palie len seli pi tempo lette.
Lon. Nila nimi pona li seme. Nimi pona tawa soweli ni li seme. Sinala nimi pona li seme.
Mila soeli pi linea seli.
Soweli pilinia seli. Pona. Pona. Nili pona tawa mi. Sina sona. Toki pona la. Sina lukine io. Sina toki e io ni. Nili nimi ala. Nili pilin. Pona.
Ni li seme. Soeli tulilon. Pakala. Soeli ni li soeli pilinya seli. Soeli pilinya seli tulilon. Soeli ni li awen tanseme.
Mi o toki ano seme. Mi pilineni lipu lilon. Yani palisa lilon ni. Pini pi palisa nila. Sitelen. Pi tomotawa lilon. Mi pilineni. Soweli tu ni li awen tanni. Tomotawa li kama. Soweli ni li wile tawa. Kepeken tomotawa ni.
Ni li wile tawa tanseme.
Mi sonala. Ni li soweli. Ni li yanala. Yanli ni. Soweli ni li tawa tomo pali ano seme.
Ala.
Ah.
Soeli ni li tawa tomo kalamamusi.
Soweli ni li kalamamusi. La kalama li seme.
Lon. Kalama. I will always love
Ah,
you.
Pona. Ano, soweli li ken kalama e ni taso. Pa.
Lon.
Pona. That's very good. That's
Oh,
fantastic.
thank you. Let me unshare here.
No, that's fine. Can you make me host again?
Oh, are you? How do I do
Or
that?
maybe I can reclaim it. Just a second. Yeah, no, that's fine. I've got it.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's see if I can get the thing back. That's very, very good. That's very good. And that was very fun. Thank you for doing that. I think that made it a bit different and made it fun. And that was great fun. Yeah, thanks for doing that. So what did we talk about? Let's just do that for anybody listening who doesn't speak Toki Pona. What were we talking about just now?
So the first thing was context setting. What are we looking at? We're looking at an animal. How are we going to talk about this animal? What are we going to call this animal? And the first natural sort of name that comes to mind is the white animal.
Yeah.
And so I knew this, having seen your videos, I knew that the natural name for the animal was probably going to be a white animal. So I had prepared ahead of time and brought a black sheep. And I was very curious to know whether you were going to call it a soiliwalopimia or a soilopimia.
Yeah.
If, like, just in the context of if we stick with the same name, are we then going to just add modifiers to the name, or are we going to actually negotiate about the name?
Yeah, and I asked you what you think is a good name, and
yeah,
came up with a good one.
and
I think it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I went with, like, because we use sheep mostly for the wool and for making clothing for when the weather is cold, I suggested the animal that has warm fur.
Yeah,
I guess.
Basically, yeah. That's very, very good. And
then we had a story at the end about sheep
at the bus stop
going to a karaoke.
There you go. Yeah, it's yeah, that was great fun. Thank you very much for putting that together. That's quite something. Thank you very much for doing that. I think the 16 hours, I think the difference between 10 hours and 16 hours, of course, actually it's watching the whole thing again twice. So basically it's the same material twice.
It's double, yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested to know what you think about coming back to ALG again now. I've guesstimated that the sweet spot for the silent period as proposed by ALG for Toki Pona is probably more like 50 hours.
Yep. I would say that right now, if we call it 20 hours, I am at the point where speaking starts emerging. Like
Right.
I'll be going about my day, and then there'll be a thing, and I'll be like, oh, kepikin.
Right.
Kepikin what? Kepikin the thing. Or whatever. And so it's just there, which is what it feels like when you start speaking with ALG. It's just there. But it like when it emerges, it doesn't emerge fully formed. And so there's a fairly long period where it's still kind of in the process of emerging. And I think that with most people, there's an experience of like it emerges sort of sparsely, and then there's a floodgate that opens at some point. And I would guess maybe that the floodgate could open at around 50 hours for Toki Pona.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Because the thing is, I can't do 50 hours. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Oh.
I just don't have the bandwidth for it. You know, it was a pandemic project, really. But you know,
But with this, you wouldn't need the drawings anymore. Like if you had a podcast where people were speaking and providing, like being mindful of providing extra context, like not moving on super quickly, I think people could follow without drawings really well, because most of the words are in place, and probably most of the grammar as well.
Well, I mean, I'd be very happy for somebody to take that torch and run with it.
Me too. I'm really hoping somebody will.
Yeah, okay. So what I'd like to do now is just to wrap up, ask you a couple of questions about your takeaways from this experience. I mean, you're somebody who has a lot of experience with natural kind of learning methods anyway, especially ALG. So has doing this challenge opened anything up to you? Has it changed anything for you in your perspective? Have you taken anything from it, or has it just been fun?
I mean, it's mostly been fun. I will admit, it's mostly just been for the fun of it. I realized through doing this challenge, like, okay, so when I've been doing Thai, there's so much content that I've never really rewatched anything. I've never like done repeated watching, which I know a lot of people like to see things again, because I think maybe they might be worried about having missed something. And I've never been worried about that. There's more where that came from.
Yeah.
But I rewatched everything in this playlist, and I don't usually do that, so that was a new experience for me. And what I discovered was that mostly it wasn't worth it. I actually discovered watching the first time as well that the stories that I knew ahead of time, like The Hare and the Tortoise or The Sun and the Wind, I didn't enjoy those videos as much because I knew where they were going. I knew what the story was. And so I preferred stories like the first one, like the first video, where I had no idea what was going to happen, or the Ilokute Lili was, I think, my favorite story, because I didn't know this. I didn't know about the backstory of it, and so I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And rewatching, there were only 2 videos where I felt like I got something new out of watching them. And I can't remember exactly which ones they were. I have notes, so if you want to know, I can tell you. But there were, it's 30 videos. Out of the 30 videos, there were only 2 videos where I felt like I got something out of watching them again, and that's because they were probably placed so that they were a little bit too hard for me in the first, when I was first going through it.
Gotcha. Were they the fables? Were they from the fables or the modern era stuff?
One of them was a fable. I think it was like number 8, video 7 or 8 or 9, something fairly early. And then one of the modern era ones was actually quite hard. And I realized upon rewatching it that it was hard partly because I don't understand the economic, like there's a mechanism that I don't understand in English. Like I don't know anything about it. And so I was a little bit lost about the mechanism of
credit default swaps in Toki Pona in 20 minutes is pushing it.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. Yeah. No, well, that's interesting. Thank you very much for that feedback as well. Is there anything that you would do differently yourself? If it was you and you wanted to give somebody a first-hand experience of how this kind of process works, what would you do differently?
Yeah. I personally wouldn't use fables. but that I think is a personal choice. Like again, it's going back to the thing where the fables are so well known that it's going to be I think less compelling because you know where the story is going. There's less surprise, and I probably would have done more concrete stories in the beginning. Like when I was learning with Thai, the Thai teachers, they have topics that are beginner topics. They don't have they don't use stories until upper beginner level. They have topics that are for beginners that are much more concrete. And I think I would probably lean towards using more concrete content in the very, very beginning.
Okay. Yeah, I accept both of those criticisms. Just to bounce things off you. The fable thing mostly came from story listening, actually, because the actual method I'm using is story listening, and fables are recommended because of their comprehensibility. And as you say, the compelling side of things, I mean, it's more compelling than other things you could think of, perhaps. But when you already know where the story's going, I agree with you that there needs to be some kind of surprise. And it's interesting. I mean, you'll know about Shannon's take on information as a kind of surprise, a measure of surprise. And where do we have the surprise? It's difficult, actually, because I need to give you enough context so you can understand what's going on. So the words themselves need to not be too surprising, if you see what I mean. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to work out what's going on. On the other hand, there does need to be a surprise somewhere, which is where the story is ultimately going. So the other thing you were saying about more concrete things, that's something I also thought of. I use ChatGPT because I'm also thinking of doing story listening with zero beginners. It's my grandparents.
Nice.
Try and teach them to story listening, but we'll see. And I asked ChatGPT specifically for good stories for story listening with zero beginners, and what I got from that was things like the kid wants to go outside, and I thought, well, yeah, you could tweak that a little bit. He wants to go outside, he opens the door, it's blowing a gale and it's cold, so he closes the door, and instead of his t-shirt and shorts, he puts on something warm, and then he goes out and has a nice walk. And it works as a beginner story. It's concrete, it's visual, and there's a story, and there's a surprise, and you don't know where the story's going, but it's nothing too out of the ordinary. I think it's a very difficult balance to strike, but it can be struck, I think.
Yeah, it's really tricky. You did really, really well with all the gestures and the drawings, and like everything you did made it so comprehensible. Like I was saying, the first video, I didn't know anything about Toki Pona. I'd never heard a word of Toki Pona, and it still was completely comprehensible.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. It's funny, some were put off by that one. Like you say, I would have been better off starting with something more concrete. I'll take that. On the other hand, I think it makes a big difference if you know and you accept that you don't need to understand what each of the words is doing in the sentence. I think that's
the key
mental block that many people have.
I think that if people are struggling with the first video, it's because they think that they need to understand words.
Yeah.
And then it takes a few videos to get over that. And by the time they're over it, they've forgotten why they didn't like the first video or the experience of the first video.
Yeah. That has happened with quite a few. So yeah. Anyway, I like I say, I'm not an expert on any of this. I'm a translator. I'm not a language teacher or acquisition researcher or anything. It just seems like a useful piece of the puzzle to give people a first-hand experience of how, even if you don't understand the words, there's something going on there. It is being used, and the key is that it's comprehensible on the message level. So I mean,
the experience, I would say that the experience does show that. In my notes, it took 7 days worth of videos, 7 videos, to get to the point where the sounds were starting to start feeling familiar. I was able to mostly split words, like recognize word boundaries.
Yeah.
So that took about 7 days. Okay. And then it took another 2 more weeks. So by day 21, the shift had happened where it feels like a language. I'm listening and it feels like I'm getting messages from just listening, and I'm not I'm not having to do any work. The things that I understand, and it feels like a language. Like that point in Thai must have taken 150 hours, I think.
Okay. That's interesting. That is interesting. Yeah. Nice. Very good. Thank you very, very much for coming on and for sharing your experience and for having a chat in Toki Pona. That was very unique. That was wonderful. Thank you very much.
That was super fun. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks.
All right.
Is there anything you'd like to add to finish up with? Anything that you think would be interesting?
I think that if anyone is wondering if they should learn Spanish or Thai or Mandarin or Arabic or any other language using ALG, I think they should do your challenge first to get a sense of what the road is going to look like. Like practice listening, practice understanding through guessing, through like all the gestures and the drawings and the pictures and the sounds. Like practice guessing from context, because that's most of the work that you're going to do when you're acquiring through ALG. But it just takes a lot longer in the other languages, and so having that practice, having an idea ahead of time, I think is really, really valuable.
Okay, thanks very much for that. No, that's good to know. Okay, so if you would like to watch these videos yourself, dear viewer or dear listener, then all you need to do is go over to YouTube and search for the abbreviation OPETP, which stands for pilin Toki Pona, which is what the course is called. And if you would like to take the challenge yourself and come on the show and share your thoughts and have a chat in Toki Pona yourself, then the address for that is bit.ly/30DCIC, standing for 30-Day Comprehensible Input Challenge. Thanks very much, Katrin. Pona tawa sinayan katino.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.